The three of us are going to have a little dialogue because both Patricia and Amanda have some experience in speaking in international fora. And so that's why we thought it'd be very interesting to share with you the experiences that they've had. Because and in speaking, for instance, they've both been able to speak at the United Nations, but also to policymakers in the UK, as well as to journalists. So that's why, Amanda and Patricia, we'd very much like to hear from you from your own, about your own lived experience when you're speaking to people who really don't understand very much about poverty. Tell us what it's like.
Hi, I'm Amanda. Sometimes you meet people who blow things up out of all proportion, and you might have an imagine of poverty that isn't true. They should take the time to get to know people properly. We once met a member of parliament who was very nasty to us. She really didn't want to waste her time talking to people in poverty. But no one has the right to criticize someone who hasn't or isn't as well off or as well educated as them. They may not have had the same struggles in life. People in poverty don't ask to be there, they just do the best with what they've got. People in poverty are often treated without dignity and respect, which to me is disgraceful. They deserve the right to be treated equally with dignity and respect. After all, they are human beings, just the same as anybody else.
Hi, I'm
Thank you.
Patricia. Sorry, Janet.
Yes, no, I just want to say thank you. And you, Patricia, you want to share, what would you like to share with us?
Yep, no problem. Once I was interviewed by someone who had no idea how her questions were coming across. She said she wanted to know what I thought, but she kept poking and poking. She dug in without really listening. She wanted me to talk at her pace instead of at my own. So I wasn't comfortable talking to her at all. When you are talking from your own experience, pace matters, and it's also important to be able to speak publicly about the impact of poverty on the right to family life. She was so angry about how the child protection system violates families' rights that she wanted to speak, wanted to speak out to make a difference. But then while she was speaking, we ended up talking about things that need to be confidential to protect her children. Next time I told her she should prepare in advance to be sure about her own boundaries so that she doesn't get in trouble. There can be serious consequences when things go wrong.
Thank you, Patricia, for raising that issue about the boundaries. Do you and Amanda have any other advice that you would like to put forward in order to be sure that things go well when speaking to policymakers?
All right, I'll start again. You need time to prepare carefully. Going to speak somewhere new can feel very scary. You'll feel better if you're able to talk about it with someone else in advance to know what it will be like and to have the time to decide what you really want to say. It's also good to know that the person who helps you prepare will be there alongside you when you're speaking publicly, just for moral support and friendship.
You also need to know in advance exactly what the conditions of the events will be. Once I was asked to speak at the European Commission in Brussels, but no one told me that as soon as you pressed the microphone button, your head and your shoulders suddenly come up on 200 monitor screens all around the conference room. I was gobsmacked. You need to know how a meeting will be, who will be in the room, if someone is going to turn on a dictaphone or a camera, and how much time you'll have so that you can prepare yourself. The main thing is that if you do decide to participate in a public event, you make sure that you have enough time to prepare your main points and that you can be accompanied so that you feel comfortable and confident and not pushed into anything.
Thank you, Patricia and Amanda. The idea that you need to be well prepared is very, very important in order to respect your own boundaries and also to increase your confidence that you can put forward what you want to put forward. Have you had some positive experiences then when you've been speaking from your lived experience? You've talked about some of the negative experiences. Have you had some positive ones?
Definitely. In 2018, I went to Brussels to speak at the European Commission about the importance of involving people with lived experience of poverty in research. We got good feedback there. They recognized that it can sometimes be hard to speak up in this setting if you don't have confidence. At the beginning, I would not have said boo to a goose. The nerves would have kicked in. But now I've been coming to ATD Fourth World for over 10 years, so that I feel like I have grown in confidence over the years due to the peer support from other activists. I saw others with more experience speaking naturally from the heart. So I learned from them how to conduct myself in public, not to be ashamed by what I say and the experiences that I share. I learned to give voice to others, people's struggles and suffering, and also share from my own experience. But at the same time, I've also learned that you should only say the things that you are comfortable with saying, just like Patricia was saying.
Thank you, Amanda. Patricia, what would you like to add?
Thank you, Janet. It's true that having a peer support network before you speak out means we can help each other to say no when we're not comfortable with the way a question is asked. We can think about what our own boundaries are. It can be nerve-wracking to meet new people from a different background. But now I realise that when we go someplace new, the people we meet are sometimes nervous about meeting people with lived experience of poverty too.
When we have the chance to meet policymakers, we don't just represent only ourselves, we represent others too that are in poverty who might not be ready to speak out. But if we can get the points across to the people who have the power to make a difference, it can be a win-win situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And having worked at the UN for many years, I can really vouch for that. I can remember, for instance, once when we were working on getting the guiding principles on extreme poverty and human rights passed, I was speaking to the delegate from Cuba, and I thought, he's from Cuba. This is a socialist country. They should be very much involved into, people's participation. And when I talked to him about the importance of people living in extreme poverty participating in their policy debates, he said, but they don't understand anything about economics. Poverty is an economic issue. What can, how can they help us solve it? But then when I said, yes, you're right, they don't understand my macroeconomics maybe, but they certainly can tell you exactly what it is that keeps them in poverty, what it is that keeps them from being able to lift themselves out of poverty, what are the obstacles put in their place, that they can definitely, that they can tell you about very clearly. And I saw a light, go on in his eyes. And so as one of you said before, often policymakers feel like they don't really need to listen to you because they don't understand that there is a whole set of issues that they have absolutely no awareness about. And so that's, I can certainly vouch that, for the fact that it is important. But we have a second part now where we were, Patricia and Amanda were going to ask me some questions.
Right, I'm first, Janet. Right, now it's Janet's turn to answer questions. When you see people in poverty speak at the United Nations, what happens when they leave the room? How do the people at the UN listen to what we have to say?
I think that often people are quite surprised and impressed by what you have to say, because your statements go against many of the stereotypes that they have of people in poverty. People who've never experienced poverty, don't realize the many forms of discrimination that people in poverty face, and the many factors, like I was saying, the many factors that keep people in poverty from lifting themselves out of poverty. They aren't aware of how hard people in poverty fight, to try to lift themselves out of poverty and make their lives better for their children. And they have no idea of the ways in which government institutions often work against people in poverty and not for them. They think that they've put social protection floors into place. What's the problem? And so it's very important that they hear your voices. To go back again to when we were working with the governments, lobbying for them to adopt the guiding principles on extreme poverty and human rights, there was some resistance because so many people feel that poverty is simply an economic development problem. It's just a matter of creating more jobs. And it was by hearing the voices of people with a direct experience of poverty that they realized that there's actually many forms of maltreatment that lock people into poverty. And so in the end, they adopted the guiding principles that actually affirm that that extreme poverty in itself is both a cause and a consequence of human rights violations. It's not just an issue of economics. And so the fact that international institutions like the Human Rights Councils are above national governments means that they can influence national policies, because it means that if we can bring to ICESCR, for instance, the whole issue of poverty and the guiding principles on extreme poverty and human rights, they have a voice that can influence the UK government.
Right. Next question. One of the human rights issues that we want to move forward is about the impact of poverty on the right to family life. A lot of social workers here will see a family in poverty, but they'll mix up indicators of poverty with indicators of neglect and end up taking the children away from the parents. How do you think we could use ICESCR review to talk about this and to tackle it?
I think one of the things that needs to be brought forward to the ICESCR very clearly is that parents are often accused of neglecting their children when actually it's the system that neglects people. That it's not parents that are failing, it's the system that is failing families. And that is why there's a large number of children placed in care or put up for forced adoption in the UK. Because ICESCR contains several articles that are very important to be referred to. One is that the States Party recognize, and here I quote, that the widest possible protection. And here again, the widest possible protection and assistance should be accorded to the family, which is the natural and fundamental group unit of society, particularly for its establishment and while it is responsible for the care and education of dependent children. Is the UK government really giving the widest possible protection and assistance to the family? I mean, I think this is one of the articles that can definitely be put forward, and that could be, and where the UK's performance can be questioned. Secondly, the Article 11 says that the states parties, in other words, the UK government, recognize the right of everyone to an adequate standard of living for himself and his family, including adequate food, clothing, and housing, and to the continuous improvement of living conditions. So, do people in poverty in the UK have an adequate standard of living that includes food, clothing, and housing? And I would throw in there education as well. And then, of course, there's also the whole broader issue of non-discrimination, that because as we just talked about before, that the guiding principles on human rights and extreme poverty recognize the fact that extreme poverty in itself is the result of human rights violations. And so the whole guarantee that there will be no discrimination based on race, color, sex, language, but also social origin and property, birth or other status, means that the many ways in which the rights of people living in extreme poverty are violated need to be examined and addressed. Because it's clear that even though the ICESCR's concluding observations will not force the UK to take action, it's just one more way of continuing to put pressure on the government, and this time with by asking experts to shed a spotlight on the UK government, where they are being looked at from outside, and so it means that then making a really good submission to the ICESCR is one way to continue working on the issues raised, for example, by Philip Alston's visit. By some of the work that all of you have already been doing at the national level of parliamentarians, and just to maintain that pressure and be sure that those issues are not forgotten. That the UK government is still going to be called to account for the many ways in which they are not living up to their international obligations.
Thank you, Janet.
Thank you, Janet.